several of you were telling me you could actually stop the heart of the animal by stimulating its vagus really hard. So that would be a suppressive rhythm. Then you can have overstimulation, so tachycardias due to too much, or ectopic, parts of the heart becoming overstimulated and speaking out, who normally shouldn't be in charge of pacemaking. And then finally, we talked about the hardest idea, circus rhythms. And remember, the key to a circus rhythm, which is what you were just looking at with that tap. The key to a circus rhythm is that normally the heart is either all depolarizing or it's all repolarized. You should not have large chunks of it in different states. And so to get an electrically heterogeneous heart, sort of two ways that can happen. You can have scar tissue that makes one tract slow to repolarize or depolarize. And then the last where we're going to pick up today is you can be born with a second bypass tract. Remember, all of these, the conducting system is built mentally. And just like you can have an extra finger or a earlobe that's funny, you can have an extra bypass tract. So I'm going to talk about the most common one, just to keep it simple. It's called Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. And in this situation, I told you how the atrioventricular ring is sometimes called the bone of the heart, the os of the heart. And it should be electrically non-conductive except for the AV node. In Wolff-Parkinson-White, the person during development has built sort of an AV node wannabe, if you want to put it that way, a little defect that's allowing the sinoatrial impulse to go straight through. And this is bad because do you remember what happens? What does the AV node normally do with the sinoatrial impulse? It stalls it, right? And so you can have this situation where the original impulse is stalled out here, waiting for atrial contraction, but you started part of the heart over here early. And so this comes through, this comes down, this goes back up, and you can start to get this circular, this circus rhythm. And usually, because this is an inborn error, you normally discover it quite early, tenderly. To be honest, the most common time is when the student and the kids start to do sports, and they'll get their heart rate will suddenly flip up to like 220. And unlike our heart rate, when you stop work and come back down, they'll be stuck. Hey, coach, my heart rate monitor is broken. Right? And this is the most common time to discover this. These bypass tracts are cool because you can totally cure the arrhythmia. Guess what you do? You slide a catheter in, get into the right atrium, electrically search until you find where the hole is, and then you fry it with the world's smallest microwave. The tip of the catheter is a microwave, and you just fry the hell out of it, and it turns into scar tissue, and you just cure the problem. Now there is only one conduit. So Wolff-Parkinson-White is actually a lot funner than it used to be because you have a perfect. When I was starting, we had a good cure for it. Yes, sir.
The way that electricity runs through, are those specific types of cells?
Yeah, I think what happens is that again they're sort of developmentally they're turning on genes that would have made them into a conduction pathway. So again, wannabe is actually a pretty good word for what they are. They're not quite normal myocytes, and they're not quite conducting. All right. So on we go. Next week on Wednesday, we'll actually get to start EKG analysis, which will be tons of fun, where we start to think about when things go wrong in conduction or depolarization to actually get pretty reliable derangements of electricity. Your lab next week will be to do resting electrocardiograms on one another. I want everyone in the class to have their own 12. And today in discussion, I'll show you that. How many people, quick show of hands, are going to discussion today? Perfection. And then I wanted someone to ask me, was it Juan or John? About ABI? Juan. So ABI stands for ankle brachial index. It's one of these silly acronyms that's trying to capture something new. It's old information. The distal pulses, because they're bigger vessels, the distal pulses resist out less of the heart's force, so more of the heart's force reaches. So normally, if someone has a systolic blood pressure in the arm of 120, the ankle will be 140. If for some reason the pressure at the ankle is lower than the pressure in the arm, that would make this less than 1, and that's a sign of peripheral atherosclerosis. Where did you hear about that? That's very cool. You work in an ER or?
No, it's in the clinic, and one of the doctors was providing one of those tests for our specialty clinic.
Nice.
I just didn't know what they were.
Good, that's what it was. They were looking for peripheral artery disease. This is the Hahn Clinic? Which clinic?
Olive Asian clinic.
Say again?
Olive Asian clinic.
All right, so on we go. So this is, the next section is to talk about what happens when you begin to exercise to the heart, in particular to the heart. But we'll talk about the whole body responses as well. This is basically EFB 101 in 10 slides. Notice, I want you to notice that all of the acute changes in the way the heart functions during exercise are going to favor, if you're going to make arrhythmias, you know, if you have that problem, you're going to do it during exercise. Because you're pulling off all the vagal tone on the heart, you're swamping the heart with norepinephrine and epinephrine, you're increasing the oxygen demand because both heart rate and systolic blood pressure are going up. And the diastolic interval, when blood supply brings oxygen to the heart, is progressively getting shorter and shorter, right? What's amazing is most of us have zero arrhythmias during exercise because the heart is so robust. If you're going to have problems, then again, I'm laying the basis for why do we do exercise tests when we're worried about cardiovascular function. Here's one. So let's just look at some of the basics. Remember, exercise is cellular activation of large amounts of muscle mass, and this begins to demand oxygen flow. And so the oxygen, the amount of oxygen that flows can go up to 20 times resting level. There's a maximum level of oxygen consumption for each person based mostly upon their mitochondrial density and their cardiovascular capacity to bring oxygen to those mitochondria. Notice what's over here is cardiac output. And so this is the very basis for, so why would activating a large amount of tissue be a test for the cardiovascular system? Well, that's how the oxygen is getting to the level of the capillaries. It's being pumped there by the heart, right? So let's do something that you're very familiar with. Heart rate response to exercise, right? I hit a heart rate of 175 yesterday during several of my interval works on the bike. I stand out of the saddle or I hunker down and pull 220 watts for a couple minutes. So heart rate goes up with work. You're all familiar with that concept, right? Since cardiac output goes up, it must be heart rate goes up and stroke volume goes up. That will be a multiplicative product to increase cardiac output. Do you all know how to estimate maximum heart rate? It's not a function of, it's mostly a function of age.
So is it like 220 minus your age?
There it is, exactly. So let's pretend you guys are mostly 20-ish. 220 minus 20, even I can do that math. 200, most of you should be able to hit 200, right? Let's do my math, shaft math. I'm 60, we'll take the extras off of it to make it easier to do the math. 220 minus 60, 160, right? Okay. Now, I want to point out it is truly an estimate. I can regularly hit 175 as a near maximum. My guess is my true max is up towards 180. People who use their maximal heart rates tend to not quite have the 1 beat per year drop off. People who are sedentary may have even more loss. Hungry? Are you wearing contacts today? I'm not used to it. Yeah. Oh. So there's your heart rate response to exercise. Hey, by the way, look, you can almost guess how old these people are. Max 180, so this is a group of 40-year-olds, if you were to average what's happening. Sure.
Is it possible to gain back those drop-offs once you've lost it?
It's a fundamental process. It gets into amiocytes. It has to do with the way time functions in dimensional analysis. That as time accumulates, all rate functions go down. Glomerular filtration rate. Anything that has to do with rate. You ever seen how old people try to remember stuff? Rate of retrieval of things you know takes longer. So that's a manifestation of the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy beginning to win. All right, so how is this heart rate instituted? As the next step, as I mentioned before, the natural pace of the sinoatrial node, if you cut it out, if you do the Aztec thing, it's about 100. So what's holding your guys' heart rates down at rest? Vagal tone, acetylcholine being dribbled in a tonic way is what's holding it down. So when you walk to your next class, the elevation in heart rate that you guys have from 60 up to 80 or 90 is almost all done by simply parasympathetic withdrawal. If you work hard enough, like during my warm-up, I'll get up to a heart rate of 120. Well, to go from 100 up to 120, now I'm actively dribbling norepinephrine on the pacemakers of the heart. So as you go above 100, that's sympathetic drug. Does this all make sense? I want to remind you, because some of you have not had the classes that I give, which is heart rate is a follower. Heart rate does not cause anything. Heart rate is a follower. This is showing you epinephrine is a hormone. Well, 80% of the epinephrine you find in the bloodstream is from the adrenal medulla. Turn it around. When you find more epinephrine in the bloodstream, 80% of that is washout, spillage from sympathetic nerve terminals. So this is really a neurotransmitter, and so this gives you an index of sympathetic nerve traffic. This tells you about the dream. They tend to go in concert, and notice the x-axis is intensity of exercise. Okay. So, sorry, I jumped the gun on follower. That's the next lecture. So given, this is fun, sorry. Given this change, tell me what should happen to heart rate if yesterday when I was having my nice workout, I was working above 90% of my VO2 max. What should happen to heart rate during exercise? You should go quite hot, right? Okay, so the only proper EKG change that you should see during, because we're going to start this on Wednesday. Notice here, you haven't learned how to do rate yet, but the rate here is 300, 150, 145. The rate here is 145. It is faster than rest. That would be a tachycardia. However, there's a P wave in front of every QRS. So this is a sinus tachycardia. That's the only normal response on the electrocardiogram exercise. By the way, if you don't have sinus tachycardia and you're exercising hard, something is also wrong. If your heart won't accelerate, that's very bad. Okay. Just wanted to point out, again, about this, why is exercise so challenging to the heart? Remember that flow to the heart, the actual heart muscle, cells themselves, happens during diastole. Here's the heart rate at rest. 2/3 of the time, 2/3 of your 1 second is spent in diastole, so the actual energy cost is quite low, and the time for blood flow is quite high. Look what happens with even light work, 50-50. Because most of the time, where have you saved the time? Well, the actual QRS impulse is already tightly organized. What amazes me is that you can speed it up slightly. Because this is so tightly orchestrated, it's hard to get slack out of there. Most of the slack is coming by limiting the diastolic period. Look like the time you're at maximal work, you almost reverse this. 2/3 of the time you're contracting, 1/3 of the time you're flowing blood in there. What do you suppose would happen if you had a little obstruction to flow in one of the coronaries? Trouble, right? And that's the whole logic of exercise. Okay. So when we put it all together, if we're going to have levels of high flow, right, I want to remind you that in order to actually do that and not create blood pressures that go through the roof and explode all of your capillaries, you have to have peripheral changes that allow less resistance to that forward flow. So at the same time that you're increasing cardiac output by 4-fold, is that about right? 5 times 4 would be close to 20, good for me. You darn well better be dropping the resistance to flow by roughly to 1/4. So if this is 16, what would that be, about 0.04? Yeah, it's approaching that. Make sense? So mirror images of forward flow and the resistance to flow, which is what allows that flow to get there. I also want to remind you, and this will allow me to skip a slide next time, in the next little bit here, that mean arterial pressure is regulated, and I want to point out that normally resting mean arterial pressures are about 95. Here. See this little tiny change? When you're at peak exercise, you might be allowing a mean arterial pressure of 110 or 115. Even that tiny little change is regulated. That's called the exercise pressor reflex. I've noticed the MDB classes sometimes mention this and make a big deal about it. It's basically the brain stem resets to a slightly higher pressure allowed. That helps with pushing blood through flexing muscle. It actually just creates a little bit higher perfusion pressure in order to get the blood into stiffer active muscle. Okay? And so here's the take-home point, that during exercise, if this period is shrinking diastole, and the energy cost of the systole in front of it, these are happening more frequently and at higher pressures, well, crap, that's really messing with my myocardial energy demand versus energy supply, at least potentially. What's amazing is we can take all of you to maximum, and me too, and discover that the heart would never be the stopping point for normal people. The muscles fatigue out, the people quit, but the heart doesn't dysfunction. And so this becomes a wonderful watershed for distinguishing people who do have abnormal hearts. They can't do that. Right? They will fail at the cardiac level. And now the only thing becomes, let's monitor the heart so that we don't wait until they're in cardiac arrest. Maybe we can monitor the heart and pick up those problems earlier, and then we know, this person has heart disease. All right. You can read that on your own. This was about acute exercise and arrhythmias. Inducing arrhythmias is not the goal of exercise testing, by the way. Trivial arrhythmias are really common. The serious kind of arrhythmias are relatively uncommon. And while they are abnormal, they're not a positive exercise test. They're not saying this person has coronary disease for sure. When people have serious arrhythmias, coronary disease is one of the things on the list. So it's not your goal to induce the attack during an exercise. Please. Okay. So this is the more ambitious part. Sorry if I'm going fast. I pulled this out. We're just going to follow a little bit more on acute changes, and where I really want to wind up is just talking about training adaptations. Yes, sir?
I don't think you uploaded that on 10.
Oh, did I not upload 7?
No.
Oh, that on me. Well, you stay tuned, and I will post it before the end of today. I'm so sorry. That's not good. All right, well, hang on. You can do this. So the point that I was going to make about the heart rate being a follower, remember that heart rate alone can't drive cardiac output. Mathematically, that's true. Instead of jogging, can you just set my pacemaker to a beat faster for 30 minutes a day while I watch TV? Patient asked. And the answer is no. That won't really result in a higher sustained cardiac output. those of you in 101 actually know I went and found an old study where we were demonstrating this. You actually took control of the heart and paced it faster and faster, which is easy to do. What's interesting is when you pace the heart faster and faster, without changing the peripheral circulation to bring more blood back to the heart, right? So the venous return here, because the patient's laying on a table, is constant. So the heart rate goes faster. Well, what that means is you just have smaller and smaller stroke volumes from there to there to the stroke volume. And so if you don't change the peripheral circulation to bring more blood back to the heart, running the heart faster just results in smaller bites of the same basic cookie of venous return. So you can't drive a cardiovascular system with heart rate alone. That's it. In natural exercise, that pressurization provided by the venules being trapped by flexing muscle enhances venous return. And so you get the situation in natural exercise where you have the heart rate doubling and tripling, and the stroke volume is also going up. There's no way that can happen. Heart rate increasing and stroke volume increasing, unless venous return is going up. Make sense? Notice that even untrained people can double their stroke volume going up to maximal work. Trained people, they start with a bigger stroke volume to begin with and can still double it. Right. By the way, what is the other side of if at rest you have 20 more mils per beat? What does that mean about resting heart rate to achieve a cardiac output of 5? Low. In terms of what the stroke volume does, the cardiac response during exercise, the heart will both fill more because of preload, more blood arrives at the heart, and the heart will then empty more because of enhanced contractility. So it's like double in an output. You get a much bigger verb. That notice this is at rest, this is an exercise. Notice that the left ventricular end-diastolic volume goes up. That's filling. I wonder if I put a preload on there, that would be like preload. And then once you have that preload, notice it's emptying even more than it was at rest. Oh, that's contractility. Got it? Okay. So remember that, let's see, in order to get functional forward flow, you do have to drop the peripheral resistance to flow, and that's mostly done by the metabolic, the metabolites that are being spilled, byproducts of contraction in the working muscle. So the place where there's blood flow, where does all this extra blood flow go? It goes where it's needed. That's what's cool. And so you guys in 101 have seen this, but the rest of you can look at this. Notice, Pardis, that 5 liters a minute at rest, and like 1 liter was going through the guts, 1 liter was going through the kidney, 1 liter was going through the brain, 1 liter was going through the resting muscle. You go to exercise, first off, the size of your pie, you have more pie. 5 times more pie. And notice that, for instance, the guts you actually turn off. You're not going to digest anything when you're running. Maybe if you kill something at the end, you can eat it. Your kidney blood flow goes way down. Your brain blood flow stays the same. If you do 4% of that, you'll find that it's exactly the same as this. And where is all this extra pie going? Cool. It's just such a lovely system. Yes, sir.
Are there regions of the lung that also receive more blood flow?
Oh, remember, the right circulation pumps the entire cardiac output through the lung. So the entire lung is receiving that much blood flow. Yes? How much in this? This is about arterial extraction. Remember, so oxygen consumption is going to be a function of total flow, and then tissue extraction. This is the tissues pulling between the artery and the vein, oxygen disappearing. And I like the colors here. It's showing you at rest, you barely remove 4 of the 20 oxygens that are presented. And so the vein doesn't blue very deeply, and it blues late. Here, notice the bluing is occurring up here. It's darker, and you actually may be removing 3/4 of the total oxygen presented. This figure shows exactly that same thing in a different way. The arterial oxygen content is not what changes at exercise. You always maximally fill your bloodstream. Ignacio, that's exactly why the cardiac output through the lung is not so high, to keep this up there. And what's changing is the amount left in the veins. It's being, this difference here is what's being extracted into the mitochondria. All make sense? All kind of reviewish? Good. Okay. So, wow, we might make it through this lecture. That would make me very happy. So, just a brief comment about repetitive, short-term, the classic one is running or cycling, dynamic exercise, pulses, that goes on for long periods of time, and static exercise, Tara not putting probably 2 times her body weight over her head, right? This might last 30 minutes, this might last 3 seconds. The amount of work here is huge, right? The amount of work that she does with these strides, about 15% of her VO2 max, just in terms of, 15% of her maximum tension. She's actually hitting maximum tension. So they're very different. In the sustained work, I worked on a microergometer for 45 minutes yesterday and I did 400 calories in 40 minutes. Good for me. The main change is in preload. You do get the exercise pressor effect. Notice the diastolic pressure is not going up. So that has to do with the vessels are dilating enough so the extracardiac output is not elevating the total pressure that much. What you see is the systolic pressure is what goes up. Oh, the heart is beating harder. When the heart opens the aortic valve, it shoves a high pressure load out there. Now, watch what happens. So the mean arterial pressure change is quite modest in dynamic work. When you do static work or intense resistance, if you do a maximal squat, your blood pressure is well over 200, approaching 300 in a single squat. You guys would be shocked and say, isn't that damaging? Yeah, if you did it 24 hours a day, it'd be hellishly damaging. But normally, if it's truly a maximal squat, you're doing one of them in a rack. So the fact that this is very short term is important. Notice what happens. When you do that acute, high intensity work, the kinking off, the high tensions in the muscle are cutting off flow to the arterioles. And as a response, the afterload, the ability to do forward flow, if you've shut off your entire lower limb, the blood pressure really goes high. So notice systolic pressure here, 240, the mean arterial pressure, you've almost lost regulation, right? And natural weightlifting, as we normally practice, is not damaging, don't be afraid. Arnie Schwarzenegger, you know Arnie Schwarzenegger had his aortic valve replaced when he was like 54? And it's funny because he's on record, I can't do a good Arnie anymore, if you know him. California. No, this did not have to do with my weightlifting when I was younger. He said this out loud. It's like, wait a minute, I don't know that at all. He was a bodybuilder. He took steroids. Does anyone know what steroids do to connective tissue? Soften and destroy it. And he's one of the few people who might be spending 4 hours a day in this state. I think that his weight training and abuse of steroids is exactly why he destroyed his Sorry. So, we're ready to move on to training. Are there any questions about that?
Yes. I was wondering how units are turned from your nervous system.
That's a great question. I actually need Desiree Amsterdam ready to study on that. It has to go up. Because we talked about how, remember what this wonderful question was thinking, integrated. If you dilate out a bunch of arterioles, feeding capillaries, you're going to leak, right? And there will be resorption, but almost certainly there's going to be some leftover fluid. And if the exercise is dynamic and sustained, it's going to be primarily the lymphatic tissues. Now, fortunately, in a working muscle, there's a lovely little pulse of pressure that helps load those lymphatic terminals and drive it back. Yeah, me and Ezra, we're going to use invasive cardiology. We're going to put a meter in the thoracic duct and have the person exercise lightly on the catheter table to actually watch lymph flow. There's no one's ever prescribed it, but it must happen. It cannot not happen. It's a great question.
We use an estimate for the mean arterial pressure at rest. Do we change that because of the change in
The time intervals, yeah, so that's very clever. So if you, I think in your homework, you did some calculation where it's like 1/3 times the systolic blood pressure. The equation was slightly different, but this is a better way to think about it. 2/3 times the diastolic blood pressure. And what these are just weight balanced for the timings at rest. Well, immediately during exercise, you can recognize these are probably going to go to half and half to make the estimate of living pressures. Good for you, quite right. Oh, good, I'm not losing you. If you're asking questions like this, you must understand. All right, so let's talk a little bit. This is training now. So this is not what happens in one workout. This is what happens a month. If you've been doing this every other day for a month, 2 months, 3, 6 months, what's happening in training? It's a wonderful English term, chronic exercise. So many of you in 101 learned the poem, bigger hearts, more blood, less stress, and vessels blood. And this is my little summary of what happens in training. One of the earliest changes and the most dramatic is one retains more plasma volume. So if you take a blood sample and centrifuge it, the number of red cells, the change is usually not significant or non-existent. What reliably changes is the plasma volume. This is what we carry heat with. This is what we carry fat with. This is what stretches the heart to get a bigger stroke volume. This is what fills up the space in the venous and makes for a better venous return. So this is even though it's a static change, it's very, very functionally important. So bigger hearts, we just talked about how if you have an increased stroke volume at rest, you can have a lower heart rate. Right? It also turns out that so bigger hearts, more blood, less stress. It turns out that as the cardiovascular system adapts in a structural way, you don't need as much hormone on whipping the heart. You don't need to whip the horse as much if the horse is simply bigger. It's like, Johnny, pull the cart up. You just have a bigger horse. And so what we see is parasympathetic tone goes up at rest. Sympathetic tone at any workload is lower. And this has there's a lot of ramification to this. With more blood volume and a slower heart rate, you're going to get more ventricular filling, more time for filling. The reduced sympathetic tone creates a lower diastolic pressure in people who are trained. Well, that makes afterload go down, so you can pump more forward. And then you'll see that the heart itself actually remodels to accept the extra volume. And so you get an altered ECG, but far more important than that is you get more forward pumping per beat, which is the most effective way to run a heart. Low pressures, big stroke volumes, the slowest rate you can arrange for that particular work. Make sense? Good summary? Okay? So, if you look at, I forget where this came from. So the maximal cardiac output goes up. The maximal heart rate, we said, is a function of age. So training does not usually change the maximal heart rate. And if anything, it actually lowers it by 1 or 2 beats. The best studies, because of the lower response to sympathetic stimulation. So the primary source of this increased cardiac output is a bigger stroke volume, a bigger functional heart. By the way, just to point out, again, you're getting a double-double. Besides by having a larger stroke volume with a lower afterload, you do more forward pumping for less oxygen? Well, do you remember that with each beat of the heart, there's a fundamental internal work that must be done? Well, bonus, if you lower the heart rate, there's more time spent in diastole, and you get rid of that extra internal work for each beat. It's just whoever, Mother Nature knows a lot about physiology, apparently. We can just barely figure out what she's done. Here's your lower blood pressures. Post-training. Right. In terms of the less stress, just to say a little bit more about this, what happens is, because you structurally enlarge the heart, the person who's doing 200 watts after training doesn't need as much norepinephrine or epinephrine to do that. They have more mitochondria, better blood flow, lower systolic, and so you just don't need the hormone. And what that does is tends to increase your functional reserves. So this is one study showing you resting norepinephrine depends more on what your day is like, to be honest. If you're truly at rest, the resting norepinephrine will be lower too. Here's the same 200 watts, and notice they've cut their required norepinephrine more than in half. Here's about exercise as a stress reliever. A lot of times we're talking about the central cognitive effect, but it is true that exercise reduces your physiological responses to stress as well. Oh, if your maximum workload before was 400 watts, and now it's 450, so you ultimately get the same. And by the way, this trend towards higher after training is true. And so you get lower at any previously accomplishable workload. But if you go to the new higher workload you've never done before, your adrenal medulla actually has more epinephrine stored in chromatin cells and you can spit them out. So it's like, again, you're getting this weird best of both worlds. I'm not losing you, and we have time to finish the. Oh, sorry to work you so hard. The questions indicate you're capable. So here's the last, and this is Leon here? There it is. This gets back to you and I were talking about how you've heard, oh, my grandpa has an enlarged heart, right? And then you hear people say, Cristiano Ronaldo has an enlarged heart. And there's an implication in one sense that it's bad, right? And there's an implication in the other sense that it's good. So you guys are currently walking around with this funny mixed view of enlarged hearts that sometimes it kills you and sometimes it makes you win World Cups. And these are two different hearts, is the point. So we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to begin to develop the idea of the athlete's heart and how that's different than pathological hypertrophy. We'll spend like a whole week on this later on, but we're going to start it now. So here is a cross-section of the left ventricle. This is what I call the blood hole, ventricular cavity. This is the ventricular wall. This is a cartoon, so they haven't quite drawn it perfectly. There should be at least two. It's almost right. There should be two wall thicknesses in any direction. This should be bigger than that in terms of. So this is a pathological response called concentric, almost concentral hypertrophy. This is what happens to people with a chronic high afterload. Untreated hypertension. I would have this if the first thing I did after the cat wakes me up in the morning, I take my meds and then I feed the cat. Sometimes I feed the cat and then I take my meds. But both are important for a successful day. But if I didn't, the heart, in response to a chronic afterload, actually grows inward, thereby shrinking its own blood hole. Again, no one knows how to make a finger. This should be smaller. It's growing inward, shrinking its own blood hole. The heart becomes specialized to create tiny little stroke volumes of enormous pressure. It's very bad. This is what athletes do. Eccentric, away from the center. Hypertrophy. In which case, because of all this increased blood volume and the increased venous return during the workouts, the ventricular cavity actually stretches. And this wall is thicker. Let's see if they get it right. It's really sad how no one can guess stupid numbers. So the ventricular wall should be thicker here, and it should be thicker in perfect proportion to how much additional fluid volume it has. So if I was to do this, let's see, 1, 2, 3, and so this should actually be about here. You could draw that in. Am I making sense about the differences? Now, just to show you what it looks like, because it's actually kind of cool, I like how all of this is actually demonstrable. So here's a control subject, a regular person. Here is a soccer player, here's a collegiate soccer player. Here's the LV, left ventricular, there's the blood hole, there's the wall. Notice that this is an end diastole, which is why the blood hole is so big relative to this. The heart is just relaxed and filled, relaxed and filled. Can you see that the blood hole is bigger in the soccer player by a significant amount? Right? Down here, they've taken a picture synchronized to the heart, so you wait until you're at maximal systolic contraction and take another picture. Notice that the total emptying is very similar, and if at this point you now try to measure the wall, you discover that the wall of the soccer player is slightly thicker, 20 to 30% thicker, in perfect proportion to the extra volume it contains. By the way, did you notice the soccer player has more visible papillary muscles? Their papillary muscles are stronger because during the work, you have to hunker down the valves better. Kelly?
In the previous slide, when you were looking at the concentric hypertension hypertrophy,
Yeah.
is the wall tension increasing because
Ah!
of relative
Ha!
pressure?
So, let me get to that. Hold that question for 2 slides. It is the perfect question. So one of the things I want you to think about, this is better. This has been, look out. Whoever drew this knew what they're doing. The blood hole gets smaller here because the heart grew inward, right? And here the blood hole, this is thicker than that, but in perfect proportion. So the thing you may not have thought about is inside the myocytes, how are the sarcomeres being added in order to create, for instance, a bigger blood hole? That means the distance around here, circumference, has to be longer. You must, remember in skeletal muscle, we don't add sarcomeres end on end. We can't once our bone growth stops. Look at what the heart can do because it is allowed to get longer, so to speak. This is longer. It actually will add sarcomeres end on end. Hey, by the way, does anyone remember that end on end sarcomeres increase Vmax? When you adapt the heart like this, it actually can get faster. It's top speed of execution. So cool. Dr. Millay here at this university was the first one to show that in the late 1970s on rats. Swimming rats. Rats don't like to swim, but they have a nice response to it. The hard part is getting those. So, this is, Kelly, the problem of, notice here we had 2 sarcomeres. In concentric hypertrophy, the heart is responding to pressure. It's just like weightlifting. It's weightlifting for the heart. And the heart literally becomes muscle memory. It's not a good response. By the way, for those of you who lift weights, I'm trying to remember who lifts weights. You're going to do a 12 lead on recently. John, didn't I do a 12 lead on you? Did I do a 12 lead on you? You lift weights. Don't worry about this. Because your sets are done in about a minute, you can't have this. You need 24/7 for this to happen. As long as you rack the weights, it won't happen. You won't get this either. Remember, didn't I say something about you should add some cardio? Because I can tell your heart is bigger than normal. But if you add a cardio, then you get the rest of the effects of the union. So, now to Kelly's question, what about wall stress? Well, one way to think about what's happening in concentric hypertrophy is if the pressure inside here is going up. The law of Laplace says that if the pressure is going up, one way is you reduce the radius from the inside and you thicken the heart. that will keep the wall tension down. And so one way to think about concentric hypertrophy is the heart is doing the best it can for the abnormal situation it has. I often call this a maladaptation. The heart is changing, it's changing in response to stimulus. Ultimately, this is a devil's bargain because the energy cost of this, of the high pressure and the thick wall, a heart like this may cost 4 times as much energy at rest, just to rest. So it's a maladaptation. It's all the heart knows how to do, but in the long term, it's not a good plan. Now, another way to think about it, so looking at eccentric hypertrophy in this, you've increased the radius. That would normally increase the wall tension. But what happened to the intraventricular pressures? They actually went down. And didn't we just say you increased the wall, the thickness of the muscle wall by something like 20-30%? And so what happens in this situation, you get a much greater pumping effect with a minimal change in wall tension. So this is a functional adaptation to large levels of loading. Is that all okay? So, Leon, we will spend a whole week talking about how big is too big, and how would we tell the athlete's enlargement from pathological enlargement. And I believe one of the reasons you don't have this lecture is because there were like 7 slides. Remember, Dr. Harris thought it was cute to put 50 or 60 slides in the lecture, and I don't find that cute at all. I took them out, but there were 7 slides that all just looked at size of hearts. And it turns out that our search, we spent 30 years saying, well, what if we just measured septal wall? What if we just measured, what if we just, and it turns out the quick answer is there's no quick answer. That you can't use a single metric value to decide if a heart is abnormal or normal. It turns out that in normal hypertrophy, it's adaptive. This implies that a stimulus made it happen, right? Someone who's completely sedentary should not just grow a bigger heart. It's symmetric, meaning that if this gets bigger, that gets bigger. It also means that if this is thicker by 30%, so is this and this. You don't have one part of the heart enlarged. This will make more sense when we get to cardiomyopathy. It is reversible. If you stop the training, it should shrink back to that. And then finally, you never, this heart, because of its added so many sarcomeres side by side, is stiff. Its lusotropy is bad. It does not relax and fill well. This heart relaxes and fills wonderfully. And so the best we can do is use a process rather than say, this index shows a wrong heart. The best thing is to use, these are the natural processes, and if it violates any of these rules, then it's abnormal. And we'll come back to that, but that's a really good tee up. So we're all caught up. I'm so delighted. Forgive me for not posting today's lecture, but I think it will make more sense now. I will post the edited version. I will probably put in the 7 slides that come after this, but realize that you don't have to know them. Just realize the search for how can we tell what's too big has been going on for a while.